Welcome to the latest episode of Five on the Floor on the Five Reasons Sports Network. Thanks for joining us on your favorite podcast app on Apple Podcasts, on Android, Spotify, or the Five Reasons YouTube channel. Make sure you hit like, subscribe, turn the notifications on. Also, make sure you subscribe to Off the Floor. Best way to do it, go to the description here, click through. You'll bypass the $1 per month Apple upcharge. You'll pay just $2.99 per month. You can cancel at any time. Get access to 10 different channels. Our guest today is on there all the time, as am I. We're posting stuff there before it's anywhere else, and we're going to be doing more and more stage shows as we go forward, which are not going to appear on the podcast feed. So check it out. It's Off the Floor. Again, link in the description. Make sure you click through. Make sure you pay. It's the only way you'll get access to everything. Also, check out the great sponsors of the Five Reasons Sports Network. Includes our friends over at Prize Picks. Use the code 5FIVE. Put down $5, play 10, you get $50 to play. That's right, pretty good math there. And you can play across the sports spectrum. It is legal again in the state of Florida. It's pretty much the same game that they had before. I don't know if I'm supposed to say that, but it pretty much is. It passed the legislation test or the legislators test. And so now you can play up to 6 players again. So check it out, prizepicks.com. Use the code 5FIVE. Get $50 to play. And now, today's episode. Welcome back to Five on the Floor. Here's today's floor plan. I'm Ethan Skolnick, and follow me at Ethan J. Skolnick at Five Reasons Sports. And you know him from Playback and from Discord. He's the moderator, one of the moderators of the Main Thing channel. I pop in there. I will say this: we got Eternal Bast. I pop in there from time to time. We've got one person in there who's literally posting 6,000 times a day, and so then it's like I just peek in, I peek out. It's kind of like what is that? What's the Simpsons meme where he kind of enters the door,
Oh,
leaves
you
the
talking about
door.
the granddad? Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm basically just saying, okay, I'll check it out. But I have been posting things there. For instance, here's one taste of it, and then we'll get to today's theme.
Hmm.
This thing that came out yesterday as part of the Chris Haynes report, which came from Jimmy's camp, and he pretty much acknowledged that. And one of the things that he mentioned was this check caper, where Jimmy was upset because he didn't get paid for like 10 days to 2 weeks, something along those lines. And so, for instance, on Off the Floor, I'm not going to waste all my attention on Twitter and this. I threw it on there today. I checked on this, on the Heat side. Their thing is, and everybody's dealt with this in real life, right? If you have a job, you've dealt with this kind of thing. They say that they sent the check to Jimmy on time and there was a bank issue on his side. And so the direct deposit bounced back and they remedied it as soon as they found out within 48 hours. This is the level of silliness we've reached in this situation, which just started as Jimmy Butler wanted a contract extension and the Heat wanted him to play and weren't ready to give it to him at that point. Anyway, that's the kind of inside stuff that goes on Off the Floor. If you want more of that, any more stuff on cash checks, canceled checks, other issues like that, we can get into it. Eternal, let me ask you this before we get into the crux of this episode, which is really about how the players on the team handle this, which is one thing we have not talked about a lot on the
Hmm.
podcast. We've talked about it on Off the Floor. We've talked about it in some other spots, but not on the podcast. Are you kind of embarrassed for either the organization or Jimmy that it's gotten to this point? Because this is not how the Heat like to conduct business. And I kind of thought Jimmy Butler was past this after he declared Miami his forever home after going, Minnesota Jimmy and everything that happened along those lines. And obviously going to Philadelphia and everything that played in with that. Like, I did not think we'd be seeing this from Jimmy at age 35. And I also did not think I'd see the Heat's business being aired publicly the way it's been aired lately. It just looks like whoever side you're on, it's just an overall bad look, is it not?
Yeah, I would, you and I have had our conversations privately. We've also talked a little bit on off the floor and on playback. One of the main things that I always talk to, especially being on this side, coming from the fan side to this side and being exposed to the workings of what goes on behind the scenes and meeting a few of these people behind the scenes, is that you would hope that adults have better ways of communicating with each other or just handling business, especially all things considered, thinking about the human side of what Jimmy Butler has gone through throughout his life. Everybody talks about his story of, being put out at 13, getting adopted and like all of the other stuff and getting it out the mud. And I know for some have talked about him being a mercenary, right? But one thing that I feel like that has been consistent throughout Jimmy's life is just him trying to find that forever home, like on some, some real shit. And so I do believe that he thought sincerely that Miami was his forever home. You've talked about it in length about him seeing the way that Wade was celebrated his last season, right? And I think with the coordination that Jimmy got from Pat and from Spo, and your jersey is going to go up there in the rafters. We're going to bring a championship here, and this is the type of player that we wanted, that we needed, and just those personalities, those egos fitting together like hand and glove. You would just think that things would be okay. And I think that with a combination of a bunch of different things happening within the last 2 years for Jimmy and for the organization, especially with his father unfortunately passing, um, that the human emotions, there are a lot of things that come up. And this is one of the cases where a lot of things can be true at the same time, Ethan. Where yes, Jimmy can absolutely be like, pay me my money for whatever reason, maybe going on in his life, or just him just saying, I just want, whatever, because given this, right? And everybody can come to the table and be like, I gave you this, I gave you this, whatever. None of that matters, right? But I do think that there could be some internal and external factors going on. But this is the part to answer your question where you would think people are able to sit down and have conversations. And the reason that's like really been on my mind is when Kobe died, I thought that a lot of people would start to move differently in how they handle business with each other, especially like just the NBA, right? And it's kind of unfortunate and disappointing to see things play out the way it is because it is very childish. And you think about like how it's reflecting on the guys in the locker room. I mean, just going back to you, like we talked about this, like the vibes were high, high in the Bahamas, right? And even
Mhm.
though Jimmy got there late, um, you talked about others talked about how Jimmy was pulling teammates under his wings and like really spending a lot of time with guys, and you thought that that would carry them into the season. Um, in those close relations. And even going back to the Spears article that you brought up, Bam calling JB his guy, but he understands it's a business. So I mean, like all of these people, like
Right.
even considering how young Bam is, which he may be the captain, but he's still 26,
Right.
um,
27, but yes.
27. But like it's a business, and so I think as we talk about this, we just consider all things.
Well, and I think that, I mean, you mentioned, coming together and talking about this. I think that, again, the Heat were open to that conversation about the contract after the season. I think where they may have erred, and, Matt Moore was on and talked about this, and Evan Cohen and others. We've had Vinny, George Sedano. I mean, there seems to be some consensus on this. We've had a lot of guests lately, is that the Heat seem to think that things would be different for them with Jimmy than it's been with everybody else. And the history of this with a player who is, there's no, I mean, this is not a criticism, this particular headstrong, okay, which Jimmy is, all
Mm-hmm.
right, no question about it. I mean, you can use other you can use other words to describe in terms of the way that this is playing out now, but at the very least, he's headstrong, he's stubborn, he has his own way of doing things, and that has is part of the reason that he's become great. Because again, he was not supposed to be great, not just his background as a child, which you alluded to, but also even all the way up into the pros, where he was drafted 30th overall. He didn't start a game his rookie year. I mean, he was not supposed to be in this position, and he deserves, obviously eternal, to use your word there, eternal credit for the position he's put himself in. But
Right.
he is problematic in a lot of ways for a team if they don't have the infrastructure to handle it. And the Heat do have that infrastructure because they have dealt with more of these situations pretty much than any other organization. I mean, maybe you could say the Lakers have had a lot of big personalities, but you're talking about having LeBron, having Dwayne, having Chris, having Shaq, okay, all the way back to Timmy and Zoe. I mean, I just those are six Hall of Famers right there, okay.
Gary
And
Payton.
Gary Payton, late career Gary Payton, late career Ray Allen. Those are two more Hall of Famers, right? I mean, there've been a lot of Hall of Famers that walk through that door, and then there's near Hall of Famers, guys who were All NBA or third team All whatever, like a Goran Dragic. They've had a lot of stars who've come through there. They have felt that they had the infrastructure to handle these kind of things, and maybe I guess where they erred here was thinking that Jimmy was like any of them, or even in that same category, when he's a whole other different level of challenge, and that is where people started to say, well, they should have been more proactive. They should have traded him at the trade deadline last year. I don't know about that. Matt talked about that when he was on, or Sedano says they should have traded him this offseason. I mean, I know they weren't really getting offers. There was some interest expressed to his agent when the whole thing went down between Jimmy and, well, Pat's comments about Jimmy, and then teams started to reach out. But there was never an offer made specifically to the Heat. And I don't know even if they've been more proactive if something would have emerged. And I don't know how the fans would have handled that, Eternal. So again, I don't want to spend a ton of time on that because I feel like we do this in every episode. But I think that if they erred, it was in believing that they could handle a situation that nobody else could, just because of, again, their franchise stability and infrastructure, and also because Jimmy and people around him had repeatedly said he wants to be in Miami. He wants to finish in Miami. His answer to my question, his first month in Miami, what do you like about it here? They let me be me. It seems like they let him be him too much. That's kind of where it looks like. And now it's like we know with everything, the Dolphins are dealing with this right now with Mike McDaniel. When you let things go, and then you try to pull it back. I mean, anybody who's, it's difficult. My daughter's used to certain things around me now, and if I say no, it's like, well, you said what? What's that word, bruh? Okay, like that's where I'm at with it. So I guess as we go forward here a little bit, it does become, I think, a little bit of a challenge for you then to say, okay, I can handle this when it wasn't clear that they could. I want to ask you about. Go ahead, real quick.
You made a very, very great point. Jimmy saying, like, so many sound bites of him saying, like, they allow me to be me. And you can see the genuine joy in his face, right? I would like to see Ethan, and I know this is a little bit of speculation, right? Again, when knowing me, people that are familiar with me in the Discord and playback, whatever, I try to consider all things. If Jimmy doesn't have the depth on his head and on his heart, right? And the another season of them being a play-in season, another season of him being hurt, right? Like, and not being able to go into the play, like going into the playoffs. Um, if those things don't happen, I wonder, does the Pat Riley comments really affect him, right?
I mean, it's impossible to know. I just know that from their perspective, what they thought they were doing was also in his interest, which is they wanted him to play more in part so that he didn't have to do so much heavy lifting later. That was part of what went into this was, okay, we don't want to be a playing team because then we're making it impossible for you to dig us out of the mud. So we just need you to play a little bit more. Now, the death in his family, obviously last year, I mean, that was a special circumstance that, again, if you look at the reporting on that, what Bernie, his agent, has
Yeah, of
said, which
course,
was
yeah.
on starting five, the Heat were very, very, they were very compassionate about that situation. They showed up at the service when it wasn't expected that they were supposed to or that they were going to. And so, I think to hold any of that against them is difficult. I think it's something where you say, from their perspective, again, we just wanted you to play more. Now, I understand his attitude on that part of it, which is, what do I have to prove myself to you again? I mean, I just lifted, B plus rosters at the very most to the finals twice and to the conference finals within one of my shots for making it to the finals three times. Okay, during that period of time, they were that close. I mean, and honestly, I think that was their best team. If Jimmy makes that shot or something else goes, Struce's shot doesn't get taken back, I think that
Or
was
his
their
knee
best
doesn't get
team.
hurt. I
Or
think
his knee,
also Jim, yeah.
or he doesn't step, or another year where he doesn't step on Josh Hart's ankle. I mean, there's all these what ifs. Okay, what if Dragic and Bam don't get hurt in the finals against the Lakers? I mean, probably. I mean, the Heat took two games in that series just based on Jimmy. Do they end up winning four? And then he's a champion in his very first year. All of these things could
Right.
have changed the dynamic of it. I'm just looking at it from right now. Right
Mhm.
now, okay, what they asked him to do was finish out your contract. That's it. He's paid to play this year. I understand his perspective about wanting to get paid. I understand maybe if he felt his body breaking down, he wants to make sure he gets paid before it gets broken down more. I get all of that. I'm not anti Jimmy in that regard. I'm just saying what they asked him to do this year was play, and then they'll look at it after the season. Okay. Play so that you don't have to dig out of the play-in and all that kind of stuff. And that's kind of where we're at right now. So I mean, again, I want to go on the other side of this to the
All right.
theme that we're supposed to get to here, which is how other players should handle this. So let me get to that. But that's kind of what's sticking with me is like I keep looking at his perspective and saying, okay, I kind of see this, kind of see this, kind of see this. But literally, you have an opt out after this year. So you had a way out of this situation if you wanted it, but it seems like because that there's no market for him after this season potentially in terms of straight cap space because it's just Brooklyn and they don't want him, that then becomes the Heat's problem. No, if Jimmy wants to opt out, play out the season, opt out. If you're that good, somebody will find a way to get you. And then if you need the Heat's cooperation for that and they don't give it to you, that's on them. That's on them. But right now, this is not on them. He has a contract to play this season, and he walked out on his teammates. And that's what I want to get to on the other side of this. Before we do, I want to mention great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network, our friends over at YouBreakWheelFix.com. Again, that's with the letter U, YouBreakWheelFix.com or YouBreakWheelFix on Instagram. Mark and his team, if you mention us, they'll do anything for you there. Okay, which means the wheel repairs, the wheel replacements. They can do the wheel, they can polish them up, give you the heat colors, any kind of heat colors. They can even do those old Vice colors if you want. Check them out. Again, it's YouBreakWheelFix.com or YouBreakWheelFix. And again, if you mention us to Mark down there, it's 5.5% off your entire order. So whatever you do, 5.5% off. All right, I want to read this to you, and then we'll get into the teammate part of this. For our friend Mark Spears here, I wrote this for Enscape. He talked to Bam. And I'll read the beginning of this. The Miami Heat and 6-time All-Star guard Jimmy Butler are in the midst of a standoff that resulted in being punished with a 7-game suspension for a franchise that historically has no interest in the spotlight unless it's about winning. While the suspension ends Thursday, the trade request lives on for an unmoved Butler. Meanwhile, Heat center Bam Adebayo has been putting his long arms around the team in hopes of keeping the focus on winning games. Everybody needs somebody to look at, Adebayo said to Anscape recently. They need that voice, that one voice where we get in the trenches and it gets dark. People lose direction. You need somebody to be that enforcer to understand that we can still win. We still have enough. We can't let this season go to bleep for the young guys. I look at them because young guys are trying to get a job. Guys are trying to be something in this league, and it's like you can't let the outside noise distract that. But for me, it's really getting everybody on the same page and understand that we can still win. And then I'll read one more quote here. Stuck in the middle is Adebayo, the longest tenured Heat player at 8 seasons. Adebayo, a close friend of Butler's, has aspirations of being a Heat lifer. You understand, this is end quotes from Bam to Mark. You understand that his business at the end of the game, and I'll leave it at that. JB is one of my guys. For me, we give him space. We let him and management handle it, get involved in that. We worry about getting these wins because at the end of the day, whatever happens with him and the management, somebody's still got to play these games. You still got to go out there and win. That's the best thing for us to get our mind off the situation. Go out there and get some wins. And then, of course, he talked about wanting to be a Heat lifer and maybe even get a statue someday like Dwayne. Now, just to put this in the context, again, Bam's a captain. Bam was anointed by everybody. Okay, and Jimmy obviously has been the ceiling raiser during this run. No question about that. This is the Jimmy Butler build. But from the beginning, Zoe, Haslam, Bosch, all gave their, and then Dwayne, okay? Mount Rushmore type stuff for the Heat. All gave their blessing to Bam to be kind of the culture carrier. Feels to me like he's in an impossible spot right now. Am I wrong about that?
No, I don't think so. I think he is. I also think he's been in a really tough spot during this entire build, just because of like we talked about this before, like just because of the age difference and the added pressure. Like if the Heat had gone into the playoffs their first year of the Jimmy and Bam Spo build and just fizzled out in the second round and just gave you kind of like this strong hope of what they could be, probably different. Things probably play out different. But because you immediately went to the finals, because you are the Miami Heat organization, and because of the performances that Jimmy had, and Bam was hurt, now it became, oh, we got to get back there because look what they did. You know, if Bam was healthy, then this would have happened. And so then it becomes this what if, what if, what if. And then you have 3 Eastern Conference Finals, and so even with Bam being at that young age, like he was thrust into a place that probably was a little bit more that he could eat, but I mean that's the nature of the business.
He's also, I mean, he's been Jimmy's co-star during this run. Now we
Right.
know obviously that he hasn't had the offensive carry on his back performances that Jimmy has. It's been something we discussed for 6 years. I don't know if there's a ceiling to Bam offensively. Lately, it seems like it. but he has anchored the defense. And this has been the Jimmy build, but Bam has been the number two. I mean, that obviously Tyler has now emerged, but late in this build, okay? And they obviously held on to Tyler at the expense of maybe doing some other things potentially, which kept it a Jimmy Bam build. But also, look, they've never seemed like particularly close. I know they're saying one of his closest friends. Jimmy's one of my guys, but I've covered teams where the two co-stars were always eating together on the road, always. This has always felt to me, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but kind of like a cordial partnership. Okay, than a close friendship in comparison to what you've seen from others. But it also doesn't seem like, say, Shaq and Kobe were, where they were sort of at odds for that got better later, obviously, before Kobe's passing. But while they were playing, there was obviously a lot of conversation about the way that they got along. MJ and Scotty seemed to get along great until afterwards, where Scotty's gotten sort of resentful about the way that things have been portrayed. But in a lot of cases, and in some cases he's right, by the way, but in a lot of cases, the top two guys, they're not always close. But again, LeBron and Dwayne, you were on the road. You saw them together. Okay.
Yeah.
Dwayne and Chris, after LeBron left, were always together. I don't see that. I haven't seen that necessarily with Jimmy and Bam. We've talked about sort of the lack of passes from Jimmy to Bam over the years. That's been a consistent thing here. Like their on-court chemistry, maybe because both have not really been three-point shooters. And it's the spacing and all that has not been ideal offensively. If you're Bam, though, and also Jimmy's friends criticize Bam constantly on social media, which
Now
you and I have noticed,
that's the
right?
one thing I would point to Jimmy because I would say they are close. They just have like a older brother, younger brother kind of relationship to me, right? Where like,
But
of
who's the
course,
but who's the older but who's the older brother? Because it seems like the adult in the room most of the time is the younger guy. I mean, that's fair,
I
right?
mean that happens in actual,
No,
relationships
I,
too.
I, I, I know, but it does seem like he's. I mean, we've talked about this. Who's the one at all the community events?
Yeah.
Bam.
Yeah.
Who's the one that shows up to Pat Riley's house for a Christmas party? Bam. Who's the one who talks to the media all the time? And so when he doesn't, we're like, wait, there's something wrong with Bam. With Jimmy, it's just par for the course. It's also difference in the interactions with support staff and other things like that. Like Bam took this from very. I don't think he even wanted the captains. Well, he's made it pretty clear he didn't. And I asked him
Hey,
about it before he
listen, I
got
was
it.
gonna say, I don't know. I don't think that brother wants to be the
No,
captain.
I don't think so either. It feels like Tyler wants it, honestly. And he has more of the personality to want it. I just don't think he's played enough or been at the level until this season where he could make a claim to it. Like we thought last year. Well, I asked Bam about it at FAU and before it happened, and he's like, "Well, I don't see who else is going to do it." That was kind of his reaction, and that's true. Now you have Jimmy Butler on the team; he's the best player on the team, but nobody even considered that, right? Okay, but Tyler wasn't ready to do it, and look, somebody like Kevin at this stage, although he is critical to that locker room, he doesn't play. I mean, Haslam, it's one thing because he'd been with the
I think
organization the whole time,
I think they could have got away with making Kevin a captain, to be honest with you.
possibly,
I think they could have got
possibly.
away with it. But again, I think the main thing is this is kind of like the evolution of learning, right? Like you see the type of coach Spo is now versus where he was at the beginning with Wade before the big three and everything like that. And I think that this is just the evolution of learning. This is a totally different situation than those other situations. And I think that probably making Kevin the captain or somebody else, like it couldn't be Jimmy, right?
No.
Because Jimmy isn't like he's not
Okay,
that
but
person.
let's because we don't have that much time left. I want to pivot to that because that's the point here, right? It couldn't be Jimmy because what? Jimmy's an iconoclast. Jimmy's erratic. Jimmy's what word do you want to use? There are ways to characterize this positively and negatively, right? There are things about Jimmy that are great to have in a locker room.
You
There are
know,
other things that are not setting an ideal example, right? So
I got the greatest analogy for this,
okay,
Ethan. For our younger fans, you won't get it. Happy Days.
yeah,
Jimmy is fun.
Fonzarella,
Yes,
Jimmy's Fonzie,
he's fun. He's a wild
yeah,
card, right?
yeah,
He's
yeah.
the cool guy that sometimes gives a
Well,
lot of
Fonzie,
great.
Fonzie was the well, it has to be the coolest Jewish person in history who didn't play a Jewish person. That was Henry Winkler. Anyway, gonna get us in trouble here. No, of course I remember Fonzie. Then that spawned Joni Loves Chachi too. Although that was not a great show. But anyway, I'm dating myself completely here. All right, let's Sorry, it's been a long week, Eternal. All right, so let's get to the point of this. Why don't you stop laughing? Um, you see my shirt, by the way? This is how bad a week it is. See this? That's I got the well, there you go. See, there you
Look
go.
at
I
the
got the game blouses,
shirt.
Chappelle shirt. You got the mesh. There you go. Um, but let me ask you this as we close this
Okay.
up.
All right.
We don't know whether Jimmy's gonna play Friday night. Okay, I'll be there. Brady and Alex will be there. Um, the Heat have opened the possibility to him playing. There's going to be a meeting. I reported on it first.
Yeah.
I've confirmed it that Mickey Arison is going to meet with Jimmy sometime Friday before the game. I don't think it'll be just them, by the way. I know
Mm,
he's met with Pat alone. I wouldn't be surprised if Nick Arison, who does run the team on a more day-to-day basis than Mickey does these days. Mickey's
yeah.
mostly a carnival. That essentially, I would expect maybe Nick would be there, and maybe at the
I think
very least, I would
Spo.
think Bernie. I would
You
think
think
Bernie
Spo?
would be there, and I would think Spo and maybe even Andy, because Andy can kind of explain what they can and can't do. But let's say that there's an agreement for him to play Friday and going forward. Okay, a tenuous agreement that he's going to
Mm,
play while they continue to work on a trade for him. They can't really suspend him longer than the 7 games at this point without league help. Okay, and league help probably is only going to come if he really screws up again. Like if he makes, in their view, okay, if he makes it completely untenable again, he acts out. I don't even think like him taking a possession or two off is going to be enough. Okay,
no,
it's going to
Jimmy
have
would
to
have to
be
do something
obvious
really egregious. Yeah.
for them to suspend again because we're
Yeah.
still waiting on the response to the grievance, right? Okay, which again, I don't even know that the player association to this point, I don't even think they've filed it yet. So that's way down the road. But let me ask you this question as we close. You're the teammates there, right? Tyler has taken more ownership of the team. Bam's the captain. Jovic and Jaquez have played better since Jimmy went out. They've got more
Mm,
opportunities. Okay. Haywood
mm,
Highsmith had some comments the other day that like were seemed very pointed, sentence after sentence after sentence about how well the team is coming together and moving on.
mm.
How do you receive Jimmy Butler back in the locker room now if you're his teammates? If you work with him? Because I know that one of the Heat's concerns was the impressionable young players in that locker room who are seeing the way things are done and they don't want them picking up on that. This is, what I'm saying? Like just like you had Dwayne, they brought Zoe back. Dwayne learned from Zoe, others. Okay, Eddie Jones was a professional when Dwayne came in. Brian Grant was a professional. That's who he learned from. If you're the teammates, how do you receive him?
I think the plus side of this is that Jimmy has been on the team for 6 years. And so kind of the environment that he has helped create in that locker room, especially because of that infamous sideline argument between him and Spo, people can be painfully honest with each other. And I think because Jimmy has taken some of the young guys under his wing and probably, given kind of that big brother love. I don't think he's really given tough love, but he has been honest with guys. I think they can be honest with Jimmy and say, hey, don't fuck up the vibe, right? Like, we need you, right? If you want to be here, we need you. If you don't want to be here, like, then don't be here. But I
Who do
do,
you think? Who do you think can say that to him? Because I think the only guys who can say that to him is Kevin. This isn't really his locker room anymore, like it was, and this came up with the whole idea of him losing his guys. The guys that I saw him be closest to, he loved Max. Okay, Gabe was another one.
mm,
PJ was another one. These are the guys you saw him interact with the most. A lot those guys are mostly gone, which I know was one
I
of
have
the
a strong
complaints.
candidate. I have a strong
Who's that?
candidate. As you said, Europeans are very painfully honest. I think
You
Nico,
think Nico's old enough to do that? Well, Nico
he
reveres Jimmy. It seems
he
like so. I don't. I
he's
know
been
he says
honest.
what's on his mind.
He
I know. I
says he
know.
says what's on his
He
mind
says what's on his
regardless.
mind. But he's
So
also not. But he's also not Goron. You know what I'm
right.
saying? Like I've talked about Nico being a little like Goran and the fact that Goran would just tell you whatever was on his mind. It's like, oh wait, do you really want to say that? And that is in some ways a European thing, okay? And it's just Goran's personality, and Nico has that kind of similar wanting to please kind of personality where he's very agreeable. But he's also doesn't have Goran's pedigree. Like, and Goran and Jimmy were friends, right? Jimmy
Yeah.
Goran, like that was. I mean, they were close. That was like the bromance during that period
Yeah.
of time. Nico is more of Jimmy has taken him under his wing. I don't know, man. I don't know who in that locker
Kevin,
room other than Kevin could say
Kevin
it.
and
UD's not
Karan.
there anymore.
Karan may be a coach, but Karan is still closer to the player side than I think
No,
Karan
yeah,
and
I
Kevin.
know. Well, yeah, Karan and Kevin would have to do it, but I think it's tough. It's going to be. Let's put it this way, and we'll close this, and we're going to do more on this, obviously, coming up on Friday. It's going to be uncomfortable, I think, no matter what. I
Yeah.
think this is one of those cases where the team has to, and maybe it's Spo or maybe it's somebody else who has to express to the players, look, this is why we're doing this. Okay. Because I think the uncertainty is what gets players when they don't really know what's going on or what the plan is here. I think there has to be transparency more so than usual, maybe between the team and the players that this is, look, we're doing this. We're still going to try to accommodate him. But right now, he's on this team and we're trying to accomplish something, and he's your teammate. So just go play ball. Okay. I
One
think that
last
has
thing.
to be the attitude here. Yes.
One last thing. What happened after the Sacramento's game? Nico said that Kevin called a players only meeting.
Yeah.
They will talk to each other. And I think that's probably what's going to happen. I don't think Spo or the coaches are going to be involved. But if they do, I think everybody will be there. But I do think it's more than likely going to be a players meeting where everybody just says what the
Well,
fuck is on their
it
mind.
can be, but you can't have a head coach ignore the elephant in the room,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
especially when the elephant, is stomping around because he wants to get paid. He hasn't got enough peanuts. All right, Eternal, we appreciate it. We'll get into look in the next 20 minutes. They could come to an agreement, or they could trade him, or who knows? Okay, no, they're
No,
not going to come
man.
to it. They're not going to come to an agreement to pay him. They may come to an agreement on how to handle this. Again, the Heat are not inclined to send him home without pay, but I've
It's
said
way
that
more
over and
likely
over.
that they go to the off season. I'm just going to be real. Like, it's just way more.
It's more likely, but as before, this is what happens, and this is why I tell people this is fluid. Before I was told there's no way we'll do that, and now I'm not getting there's the no way we'll do that. It's just that it's highly unlikely we would do that. I think that again they're waiting to see how things play out and how much backing they get from the league. Um, so I think that may be where it's at. All right, Eternal, you can follow me at Eternal Bass also on Playback on Discord. Join us on Off the Floor, and yeah, have a good day, everybody. We'll see if something else happens. We'll be back.